Hey, my name is Mike Acosta.
And I'm Jim Stout.
And we are obviously from ADSR. First and foremost, Happy New Year. And this is the next edition of Gear Chat, which we know that a lot of you have been waiting for. We've been waiting to do it as well.
Yes, finally, the Korg M1.
Yes.
We have completed the hat trick of the most famous 80s synthesizers, I think, in my opinion. But
yeah.
I would like to think a lot of people would agree with that.
Yeah, and again, remember, like when we do these gear chats, we're really just we're not making comparisons to other, keyboards, because we've seen a lot of comments where people are like, oh, this is better than this. It's like, we get all that. This is just, we're talking about one piece.
These are just stories about the M1.
Yeah.
And if you go back and watch, we did the DX7, the D50, the SQ80, the Emulator 3X, and now we finally get to the M1. We've been holding off on this one, mainly just because I feel like this one has a lot of backstory, not just the impact that it had on the music industry, but also on the retail of musical synthesizers.
That I will agree upon.
So I think there's two folds that happen with this that are quite remarkable. One, obviously the massive music influence, and I think we should probably start off on that. What songs did the M1 do that were hyper famous?
Well, I think, when we start talking about the M1, this came out in 1989.
88.
88?
88.
Oh, I thought it was 89. Well, I stand corrected. So, either way, the late 80s going into the early 90s, for me, in my opinion, was like a very pivotal change in electronic dance music as a whole. The style of house music was starting to change because you had hip house, you had guys like Mr. Lee, K-Wise, Fast Eddie, all these things. And in there, you would always have these stabby pianos. M1, and then you also had like R&B and hip hop was changing, and you had that whole New Jack swing kind of sound and stuff. So again, a lot of the sounds from the M1, the South American Latin market, for cumbia and banda music and all that stuff was changing, and this played a huge role in that. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in terms from the retail aspect when I was working at Guitar Center. But I would definitely say in terms of like old school house music, deep house, the M1 was just huge, and it was the organ sound, from it.
So Robin S., I think, is probably the most common, popular one. Show Me Love, and I believe that was organ 2, I think it was, in here. Organ 2. Or how do we play? I don't remember how it goes. But anyway, I think, but that was the sound, and you're totally right. For me, I was really just kind of really getting into, I was still kind of reeling off the D50 when I was a kid, So when this came out, let me tell you how they introduced it. So I don't have the exact issue, but it was one of these keyboard issues. And in these, back in the day, they used to come with these little records in here, these little flexi records.
Yeah.
And what Korg did, which was brilliant in my opinion, is they put the demo of the M1 on this disc.
Nice.
They must have paid Keyboard Magazine a buttload of money, because this one is, on this record right here, it's Susan Ciani and Terry Riley.
There you go.
So it's like this was always a big privilege to get on this little disc. And so for Korg to come in and be like, hey, we're going to do this.
Put the demo song on it.
And remember, we talked about kind of first impressions with the DX7 and the D50 and stuff. And it was like when you first heard this, a lot of people just didn't come up and play it. What a majority of the sales guys did is they just played the demo. So they would play this. The salesman would tell you, he would be like, this is all coming from this one machine. This one keyboard is making all of this. And they would shut up.
Yeah, I mean,
But the best part's coming up. The drums. When the drums kicked in, people were like... That was it. That's all the sales guy had to
how
do.
would you like to pay? Cash or credit card?
Do you take kidneys?
Yeah. Yeah, and that was the thing too, like with this, like a lot of people considered it to be basically the workstation version of the D50.
Which couldn't be any more wrong.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, but I understand. It's like...
because it had the sequencer and all that stuff built in.
And I actually have a very old electronic musician magazine from, this is 88, this is November of 88. And on the cover of it, it's a workstation shootout. And this was really the dawn of the workstation right here. So they had the D50 with, I mean, not the D50, they had the D20 with a sequencer on it. So it was a scaled down thing. We talked about that. They had the Ensoniq SQ80, and then they had the Korg M1. Now, in 1988, when you were trying to have, like, you know, keyboard supremacy, that's not really a fair fight at all.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You know, for a lot of reasons. And the sounds are really, really what made this really pop. Now, some of the other things that Korg did, I'm going to put this in here. When they first started running advertisements for this, they had the S1, which was supposed to be like a really high-end sequencer that came out. The M1 was the synthesizer aspect of it.
Right.
Then they had the Q1. I don't really remember what that was. I think it might have been some other kind of sync box or something like that. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. But here we go. Q8, yeah, SMPTE, MIDI to SMPTE workstation, 250 track sequencer, redefines blah blah blah. The S1 production workstation. It's a stereo 16-bit sampling drum machine with powerful. This turned into the S3 drum machine. But that was the original concept for it. And I think there might be only a few of these that actually really exist in the world. But that was their whole thing, that this was going to be your new production studio. And it really succeeded. And then they would go on, and then the ads would change. And then they had, you know, brought out the rack mount M1. And then they had quotes from like Daryl Hall and John Oates and some of these, and some of the things they say in here are fascinating looking back on it. We eliminated our entire studio. All we own now are M1s. Boy, I bet they regret that.
I think we all started making that mistake in the early 90s, man.
And then we just transfer them, the M1s, to the 24 track. We don't need any other acts. This was Neil Jason and John Silberman. So these guys were top New York and TV jingle producers in New York City. And a lot of these quotes are, you know, the same kind of thing. It's the simplest synth, it's great. The sound of the M1 is simply great. The absence of FM noise is a giant step forward for me. Ouch. If that's not a fucking dig. But it's just crazy. And there was, you know, this is Bon Jovi on it. This was in the day of like living in a prayer and all that stuff. So this was December of '88, but they had a Korg M1 clinic, and people just couldn't get their heads around what they were actually hearing, you know? Because the D50, cool, you got digital native dance, one kind of thing. But you didn't have, you know, the DX7, you had those pretty electric pianos, and that was the big thing, is it kind of sounded like a Rhodes, so you didn't have to bring out this whole Rhodes. This thing really broke the mold, and not only the sequencing, but in the fact that it was the first commercial synthesizer that you could afford that had a realistic piano sound. So like at the high end, and then the most impressive thing back in the day on this kind of stuff was a low-end synthesizer. Piano. That sounds like a fucking piano.
Yeah.
People lost their shit.
The thing was too, is like with the M1, it only had 4 megabytes of PCM like multi-samples on it.
And there's only 100 of those. Yep. Well, actually, no, there's more than that. But
it's 144 multi-samples.
Yes, and within the multi-samples, there's not as much as you would think. I think I did a test on this one time where I was like trying to find the split points. Okay, right there. So you can tell right there. All right, so that's one split point. All right, we're only going 6 out, but I doubt very seriously there's anything down below that. So you can hear that. That's right here. So I would say it's that range is one sample.
Yeah.
And then they've got one other piano sample up here. So for this thing to have basically, I'm going to go ahead and say 3 samples for the piano, it pulls it off. And it sounds so much like a piano the first time you hear it. You're not used to it sounding like this. You're used to the DX7, you got the pretty bells, D50, you got the glassy bells. This, holy shit, sounds like a piano. And then brass. Choir sounds. And so this is famous. This was actually used in, or supposedly abused in Enjoy the Silence. So a variation of this. The guitar, this was famous. Prince used this a lot. So like,
yeah. And back to the brass sounds and everything. So just one really cool fact is, like, I started working at Guitar Center, I think 96, I want to say. Now obviously they stopped manufacturing these, I believe, in 94, which was like a year after I had graduated from high school.
Yeah, I believe that is right.
So,
and that's crazy too, because the O1W had been released. So there was the M1, then the T series, and then the O1W series. And the O1W is supposed to be the M10, but apparently the engineers saw it upside down, thought it looked more interesting, called O1W instead of M10.
Right.
Who knows? But yeah, the point is that they were selling the O1W, the flagship synthesizer, with the one that came out in '88.
Yeah.
Now, why was that?
Well, at least from my perspective back then, I knew I had every single, and I worked at the Guitar Center in Brea. So, I mean, you want to talk about the demographic in that area was primarily just Caucasian. There really wasn't a whole lot of ethnic diversity at the time over there in Brea. But we had a ton of, I would get a ton of Latin bands that would come in that were doing like cumbia, salsa, and all this stuff. And at the time, I didn't really know about all the real sounds that were inside the M1. I was always just used to synths and things like that. And but it was the brass sounds, because they were using it for all like the horns and this and that. And obviously it was then not having to have a bunch of live brass players, with them, and the keyboardist would just have the brass here. And so literally all day long, I would sell these like crazy. Now, the funny thing is I didn't know that they really weren't in production, because somehow we still had brand new units in the box.
No, I think they were manufactured until '94.
And I think Guitar Center probably had bought a big
probably.
chunk, because this was in '96 and we still had them. Now, it wasn't easy to get, because I was always having to call other stores and get one sent in. It's not like I just had them stocked. But I mean, it was just non-stop. They would come in with cash M1s all day. So
yeah, I mean, because that was everybody knew it had that sound that they needed.
And the pianos.
Yeah, and it was. And the pianos in here, they generated, a classic sound of their own. You think of everything from Madonna to all the classic house pianos. The majority of them are from the M1. I would probably, I would say maybe 70%. The rest are probably going to be samples from like the Mirage or another sample stab or something else like this. It wasn't. It would have been like the W30 or something like that. But but 88 and on, every freaking house track, this is the M1 piano.
Oh yeah.
But the trumpets. Let's see. Also I think because there was also a 16-foot. And then there was an 8-foot piano, and I think the like all the Madonna stuff, they were using the 8-bit piano, and that might even be more of the house stuff too. Magic piano, choir string.
Well, I know on the software version of the M1, they call it the house piano.
Of course, but I think it was. So yeah. So that was all I think that was the piano for that.
Oh yeah, the house pianos, and the organs. You know, all over all the records from the early '90s on house tracks. Like even the Nightcrawlers, Push the Feeling.
Apparently, this was used in the Seinfeld theme as well, the slap bass.
Oh. Bang, 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 bang.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, you know. Yeah, I think that was really, when people heard this, they lost their minds. They really, really did, because for the longest time, people were trying to replicate real instruments. That was the real goal of the synthesizer. That was the end game, and between the DX7 and the analog stuff and the D50 stuff, they all helped create iconic sounds and genres of music, but none of them sounded like a real piano or real strings or real brass the way the M1 did.
Yeah.
And this was fucking science fiction. This was flying car kind of stuff,
Yeah.
The only way that people were really able to get into this is again, the Synclaviers, the Fairlights, the Kurzweils. But around the same time, Kurzweil came out with the K1000. The K1000 was a 76-note keyboard, and then they had a bunch of other rack modules like the HX called the horn expansion and the SX with the string expansion. Had some great choirs and stuff like that in it. But they were really, really expensive. Considering, they weren't in the $10,000 range. I think they were around the $5,000 to $6,000.
For that time, it's still a lot. Of money.
So for this to hit for $2,000, 1988, you got strings, pianos, choirs, organs, and they all sound like the real deal.
Yeah, not to mention
with
you had an
4 meg of ROM.
Yeah, and then you had the 8-track sequencer on here, so you could have up to 10 songs, on it, and
the sequencer was highly usable. There was a guy that I knew in high school. He had an M1. That's all he had, but he would do covers of Depeche Mode tracks that to this day would hold up, and he did it all on the M1. And it's shocking how really powerful. And the selection of waveforms that went into this, a lot of thought and care went into it. But that's the big difference, is their actual samples.
Yeah.
They are not being digitally generated. They're not being quote unquote synthesized.
Yeah, it used a combination of both.
Well,
together.
absolutely, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of comments on this video about the Korg M1 isn't a real synthesizer. The Korg M1 is just a Rompler. It's nothing unique, blah, blah, blah. So I think some people don't really give a shit. And some people really are passionate about, no, the fact is it's blah, blah, blah.
Right.
In my opinion, a synthesizer is an instrument used to create sounds. How it goes about doing that, there's science in it no matter how you slice it.
Oh yeah, there's
no pun intended.
Variable methods, whatever.
So the way they did this, and again, I made this point on the D50 video about the layout and the front panel.
Yeah, and that's what
do you not see?
Yeah, and that was the thing we were going to talk about is when we did the D50, we said that we would touch on this again when we did the M1, and it's just completely
It is
clean.
So streamlined. It's got for back then, a big LCD backlit. Okay. Yeah. A 10 keypad so you can get the sounds fast, and then these kind of buttons. But there is nothing on here at all that explains the actual structure of the way the sounds are created. Because I think what happened was, I think manufacturers finally learned that customers didn't give a shit. They wanted piano sounds. They wanted organ sounds. After a decade of synthesizers trying to recreate piano, strings, guitars, and horns, something finally did it. You didn't have to fucking program it.
Right, it was just already ready to go.
It had 100 programs in it, 100 combinations, and it sold, it is still to this day the highest, I think, number of units sold of any synthesizer ever made. I want to say there was around 250,000 units sold of this, which would not be shocking worldwide.
No.
I mean, because it outpassed the DX7, and it pretty much put a nail in the coffin of the D50 at the time, because within 1 year, I mean, we talked about how bright the D50 burned. It was everywhere, and it had a unique sound. So within a year, people were like, and then this comes along, and everyone's like, oh shit, there's all this new stuff. So the D50 kind of fell off really quickly, and Roland really never regained that dominance of the workstation market. I
don't think it was until they started coming out with the XP series where those really got popular.
Well, I mean, even the XP series, they were going up against the Tritons at the time?
Yeah, at that time, and that still didn't, because again, it was Tritons all day long that I was selling like crazy.
Yeah.
I couldn't keep them in stock.
No, I know. So, without getting too far down the line, but yeah, so, that was one of the reasons that I think it just went everywhere, because it was the first affordable synthesizer that actually sounded like a piano. And you notice on here, the second sound inside of all of this, we go back to the very beginning sound. The very first sound is Universe. And it's a double, you can have this in single mode or double mode. So double mode, it basically just gives you another layer.
That was the combi mode, right?
No. Combi mode is where you could stack up 8 sounds at once. There's a double mode when you go into program and you hit edit program. You've got double and single. So basically what you could do is it gave you basically kind of you could layer 2 different things on it and split the filters and these kind of things, which we'll talk about in a second. But
see, I always did that just in combi mode. I didn't really even know about that.
In single mode, well, it's not something that you got to program from the ground up. It's not something that's super, kind of but give you that freaking soft sound and all the kind of belly stuff that the D50 happening. Yeah. But the very second sound is piano. So the pretty washy stuff got your attention, and then the piano
you came in, you went to the second one. It's got nice pianos.
Piano. And some people just leave it on that patch, or they'll play the Oh Yes demo. And but there's some other great demos in here. One of the other ones I wanted to do was like the new age guys went fucking apeshit for this. When the horns come in, they sounded huge. Pole sample's huge. And when it comes in, it all swells.
Snaps.
Yeah, the snaps are legendary too, right? Yeah. So it was just like, oh my god,
All you guys doing the future bass, the R&B, the OVO stuff, and the new styles of traps and those snaps and everything.
Right here, and that the drums in this, they were in here, and so they had a couple of drum. How it was with the beat I was wanting to do, but all these snares, big old huge rock drums. It was just like wow, and they had all kinds of stuff all at the key, electro toms. You could almost make any kind of track with it. It wasn't perfect, but that was that leads on to the change in the music industry and what happened, and it became the war of the piano.
Yeah.
So much so that when they introduced the O1W and the M1 do not have the same sounds. It's not the same piano.
They're very different.
This piano, the piano that's in the O1W was apparently resampled and was more tuned for more classical kind of stuff. That's how the rumor goes. But it didn't have the sharp.
No, it wasn't as aggressive. With that little punch
as the
on
M1.
the front as the M1 was.
So it became this massive freaking battle. And when we were working at Roland, I worked on the Phantom X piano. And this was a huge initiative because at the time, some of the other pianos and stuff, I really feel like Korg kind of always ruled that area.
And Yamaha at the time too.
Saying, when the Motif came out, that piano gave us hell. It sounded, that's when Yamaha really started taking into that Motif. But the reason was that if you think about it, you go up to any of the synthesizers made from the early 90s to late, all of them are going to have the first patch as piano. And that was, for when we recorded the Phantom X piano, we recorded this really classic piano. I remember going out with Scott Tibbs, and we went to this really hip place in LA where you can rent whatever, So we rented a really, really nice piano, a classic legend piano, and we brought it in and we had to let it rest a day, and here's some pictures from it. But anyway, we recorded everything with a Neve console with this massive mic setup. We had piano tuner on site, so everything was always classically in tune. We recorded everything at 24/192 all the way down to 16-bit 44, and then we would take those files and we'd send those to Japan just to see which ones would compress better. So you got to figure. What I need my calculator right now because I can't.
That's when we were still using the RDAC and all that stuff.
Yep. So we had 88 keys times 4, so, and it was 2. So, 88 times 8, 704. That's what it was. All right. So in the Phantom X, we had over 700 waveforms. Each note was stereo and 4-way velocity cross switched. So it was the most detailed piano that Roland had ever done, And they were able to compress all of that into, I think, 22 meg. Yeah, but keep in mind, the M1 did it with 3 samples and 4 meg.
Yeah.
Although it's a decade later, or more than that. But I just find it interesting that that's how far it got, was the chase for the ultimate piano sound. And no one really, not that I know of, again, weren't really big into programming the M1. There's no sliders except, there's 2 sliders.
Volume.
And some button volume and
so
data
actually
entry.
1 slider.
And the other thing too, they expanded on this with PCM cards. So you could put new waveforms in here, and then have new program data in here. So the idea, the early kind of expansion boards where you just plug in the PCM thing.
And so this is the EX version of the M1. But if you just had a regular M1, it was 4 megs, like we said. But you could expand that to 8 megabytes if you got the expansion card.
Yes, and I'm fortunate enough to have the one with the EX, the expanded version. But the thing it doesn't, in my opinion, from a pop culture standpoint and a musical standpoint, if you were recreating stuff, the EX doesn't really do much for you because I don't think anybody really, most everybody had the standard M1 used that.
Had the sound.
I couldn't tell you really what the new different waveforms were in the EX.
Yeah, I think it gave you, 275 multi-samples when you had the expansion. But again, I think the factory sounds just on the regular M1 were the sounds.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like if you had those, you were good.
Yeah. I mean, because that had all the sounds that everybody wanted.
Yeah.
And it could pull off a Moog bass line close enough for whatever, but people really weren't. Again, in the late 80s, man, technology was magical.
Yeah.
It was just like, oh, this does this. And they use this, common, what is it called? As AI synthesis.
Yeah.
AI synthesis. So it's, sample playback, and you can manipulate the envelopes. It's got a filter in here. It's non-resonant digital filter.
I remember that's their VDF, the variable
dynamic
variable digital filter.
Digital filter.
Yeah.
Well, again, that was one of the things. Digital filters were still a very early technology. There weren't first mini digital filters out there. In fact, I think probably one of the first ones, that had resonance, was successful, would be, the D50 would be one of them. The other one would be I want to say the EMU stuff, like the Emax 2 had their first full digital chip in it, full digital filter in it, because the original Emax...
That wasn't the Z-Plane.
No, the Z-Plane was later. That was onto the Morpheus, but the original Emax had analog filters. The Emax 2 had the first digital filters, and those sound great. And it's the same filters that same chip that's in the Emulator XS. But I think that they just didn't have the technology then, probably, for a digital filter at the M1 stage. And even the O1W didn't have digital resonant filters. You could use something else, but it wasn't like a resonant filter like we commonly think of.
Right. Well, I mean, the cool thing, I think, was that Korg actually went and took some of their popular keyboards, and this was, in the late 90s, and finally converted that over to software, so you can get the M1 in a VST AU, and it sounds really good because I've used it on several remixes and everything like that, and it's pretty good. Now, is it exactly, some of the sounds are pretty dead on, some of them are slightly off, they're okay. Like, I still prefer the organ sound on here.
We'll do some comparisons.
Yeah, then the actual I think it's still cool, and on the software version you get all of the expansion cards which are included. So I thought that was a really cool thing.
I think it is too. I think, but there's still something about playing in person when it's when it's here. And it just sounds 3D. Again, it had built-in effects, so you had chorus and reverb and delay. And that
reverb was really cool, but it was strong. Like it's one of those things where a dab will do you, because it was just. Yeah.
I mean, everything is like. But it gave it that. Like.
Added that depth.
So Brian Broom right there, people got their DX7 piano sounds.
So I mean, I would say, like, in closing and everything, because we could be here forever going on about stories and everything. It's needless to say that the M1, like we said in the beginning, had a really, really big impact on dance music as a whole, the various musical genres, how it affected in the retail market and in the MI business, meaning how this kind of set a standard for other companies to follow, and what really changed how workstations were going to be developed and what was going to be in them, because obviously they underestimated the use of the workstation portion of this keyboard. And that's where you see where the next iterations, had double the amount of tracks and all these other things that were getting expanded, because obviously people were seeing the value in having that and not having to worry about having a big, massive studio and whatnot.
Again, I think it just boils down to the fact that people were chasing, acoustic sounds. And that was, you look at the Jupiter 8, you look at the preset on there, it's in there, it's oboe, piano, clav, and none of them sounded like any of that. And this really
made
did.
It famous.
And people didn't give a shit about the synthesis method.
No.
Which one is better than the other? No. It's like, can you get a result? Can you make music with it? We've always said you can have the most expensive mic setup. You could have, the Sony water-cooled blah 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 mic with, a 1073 mic preamp with my Mogami super duper gold
cables and whatever.
All that and have it all in there. But if you record a weasel fart, it's still a weasel fart. It's like, it doesn't matter how it was done, but what did you do with it?
What was the end result?
So I think that the M1, when that dropped and people just heard it and they heard that demo, and when people took the flexi disc out of the keyboard magazine and put it on and they heard that.
Oh yeah.
That was like, I need to go check this out.
Yeah, no, it was definitely game changing. It was some brilliant marketing on Korg's end,
I don't even, but there's nothing in this marketing, like this doesn't tell me shit. It's like, it's got the M1, it's 16-bit 2 meg composition system with 61-note keyboard and drum machine, plus 100 ROM-based sounds from acoustic waveforms.
I remember back then, everything was about the future.
Yeah, tell me that's not some, Blade Runner shit right there.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, but, I don't think the marketing even on it was that great. I just think it sounded so damn good. And they put that flexi disc on there. I guess that would be the marketing, aspect of it. But, yeah, I think it's...
Either way, it's awesome piece, at least in my opinion. I love it. I'm actually, again, trying to track one down to get one. So we hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Gear Chat about the M1. If you have any questions or comments, make sure you comment below. The next episode
of Gear Chat,
let's get on. Or do we announce it now, or we just leave them waiting?
No, we'll leave. I don't know. There's pros and cons to both.
Could be.
Oh, fuck it. It's going to be the MV8000 8800 series, the Roland MPC killer that was designed to come out. And we've got some amazing stories
with that.
So thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you hit subscribe. And we are going to really be ramping up on the Gear Chat stuff. We've got a great year planned of really, really cool stories and some fascinating history about some of the most game-changing synthesizers and drum machines and digital instruments that came about. And we'll also be taking a look at some new stuff as well as it comes around. So be prepared. I think I would love to do a Gear Chat on like the OB6.
Yep, that's...
Yeah. All right. So, but anyway, I'm Jim Stout from ADSR Sounds.
I'm Mike Acosta.
Thank you guys so much for watching, and
we'll see you in the next one.